So we have Gaurav with us on the show today, and looking forward to know more about his journey and his venture into the education space.
We
Thank
heard
you.
really highly from you in the past season from Swami, Harsh Swaminarayan. We did an episode with him. And I think it was a hour and a half long episode, and 30 minutes were basically him talking about 3 to 1 and you and the culture in the firm. So that's when we decided we really need to like kind of talk to him to bring you on the show. So thank you for doing this. Really appreciate it. We can directly jump into the conversation, right? I saw you worked in Accenture before moving to for Teach for India and then 3 to 1. So I just wanted to ask, like, why did you choose the this field, right? Like where you educate students, and like how did you make a switch from Accenture to, like, what was your why to do this?
So it was a whole bunch of things, but I'll sort of tell you first a little bit of story of how it actually happened, and then I think the bigger sort of point around it, right? So I was at Accenture. It was a good firm. I was enjoying what I was doing. I was a programmer, but like many of us, I was feeling there's something missing. I was not super excited about a lot of the work I was doing. Optimizing inventory management for some big company was not as fun. And incidentally, a bunch of us were out one day. We went out to eat at a whole range of places we'd never gone to. And essentially, when we came back, I felt horribly ill. My stomach was gone. I was puking the whole night. And next day, most people it was, I think, around the Dashara. So I think I'm very similar this time for Ganpati. So people were leaving back home for the festival. And so I was pretty much sort of alone for a couple of days. And then I was supposed to fly out the following day, right? So I spent 2 days alone, pretty unwell. And then one evening, tomorrow morning, I'm flying out. So I call my friend. I'm like, just for tonight, I'll come over to your place. I don't want to be alone. And I'll fly out tomorrow morning. Like, sure, come over. I go to his place. He has some friends, so they're chilling. And I say, I'll just be in the other room, but give me something to read because I can't sleep without reading. And he says, I don't have anything. I have yesterday's newspaper. So he gives me yesterday's newspaper. I take it. Front page is your usual, this murder, this, this crash, this thing. And the next page was essentially the first ad that Teach for India had ever taken out. And when I saw it, I never saw the teach part, actually. I just saw the For India part. And then I went to the website, saw, and pretty quickly decided that this is what I want to do. Now, the funny thing is, once I went in there, right, I realized that I really liked teaching. I was pretty good at it. But the fact of going in there and going into teaching was a fairly, random choice that I made. And I would have gone for, who knows, sanitation for India. So I'm actually glad it was not sanitation for India and Teach for India, because I had clearly much more of a passion and talent for teaching than for sanitation. It was essentially, that's what pulled me in. And I realized something later, right? And I'm guessing maybe you all might resonate, right? The tragedy of the early years of life, and in general, is often when we're looking for something, we're not able to describe what we're looking for. And we only find the language to describe it after we find it. Right? It could be for a career, for a person, it could be for friends. And the reason you struggle is because you know what you don't want, which is what might be around you. You want something else. Because you've never seen it, you can't describe it, right? Now, so for me and for Swami and for many of us, and I think many of you on the call, the thing I was looking for was a sense of purpose, right? Something bigger than me, something where I could contribute and not just be looking for my own sort of, making money or any of those things. The issue was I never had the language to be able to articulate that, right? A year or two into the journey, I found the language. I was able to explain that to people. But before that, my teenage years, my early 20s, I would be babbling incoherently and people would not be able to understand what I was saying. And that's what happens. It was not a straight journey, and I got lucky in a couple of places. But essentially, it was about finding something which gave me a lot more meaning, a bigger sense of purpose. And I feel very, very lucky to have found that. Very grateful for that.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Like, I was, even when I wanted to explain what I wanted to do during my during my 4 years of engineering, it was so difficult because we didn't have the vocabulary, and also we didn't have the resources that is now available thanks to like the information boom. Still, I think you need to have like a curated version of what you want to do and to understand how to express what you actually want. Actually, first need to understand for yourself, and then you got to try to like explain it to other people. So even to tell yourself what you actually want to do, it's nice to have those ideas and what other things are out there.
What the hat might be helping with that.
Right. Yeah. That's our hope. And thanks to guests like you who've been in the similar boat. Again, who better to ask and guide the next generation. So tell us a little bit about 3-to-1 Education Foundation, right? Like, how did you join it, and what it basically does for people who don't know?
Yeah. So once I finished my 2-year fellowship at Teach for India, what I knew was that I wanted to start something of my own. And it was a couple of reasons. One is I had a certain view of what I wanted to do in the education sector. And second is I had certain views on how I wanted the org to run and function in terms of culture, teamwork, all of those things. And I didn't find an organization that I very strongly resonated on those fronts, and I wanted to sort of do something of my own. Of if you believe in something and if you don't find it, then go create it. And so I said, I've always felt very strongly that one of the most magical things anybody can experience is to be part of a really cool team. It's very hard to describe what it does to human beings if you're part of a really great team where you trust everybody. It's a high competent group, where what it does to you in terms of your learning, of how much you improve, of people who will not let you down, who you don't want to let down, and what it does to improve the quality of everything around, and how much fun and how much, what meaningful memories you put. Right? So you mentioned Harsh, who was here on the podcast a few episodes ago. That's what it was for all of us, right? Who spent time at 3-to-1 together. And so a really important thing for me was to try and create that. And I didn't see many versions of that appealed to me. I didn't have that much of an access also. So the idea was, okay, if you want to see something in the world, if you don't see it, go build it yourself. So I started 3-to-1 Education Foundation pretty much from there. And our work, over the years, we've gone through a journey of our own, of the organization figuring out what we can do, what, as you, especially in social problems, what are called big problems, the deeper you go, you understand it much more intimately. But in the last few years, we've really sort of centered around, so India has about, almost 12 lakh schools and close to 1 crore teachers. And forget counting the number of children, right? Because we have as many children as all the children in US, UK, Germany, Russia, South Africa, and China put together. That's the part that people don't realize, right? China is significantly older than us. We are pretty young. So we have a huge population. So almost 12 to 15 lakh schools. So what we try and do is we try and figure out, how do you help the existing system perform much better? So what we'll do is we'll go to a school, we'll work with the school leader, we'll work with a teacher, we'll bring in a curriculum, we'll bring in a new way of doing assessments, and we'll help them work with parents and all the different stakeholders in all the different ways. The aim is to just improve the quality of education, to make it significantly more fun, to make it significantly more relevant, and just to help children learn better, right? If you go into an average classroom in India, and for most people who are from middle class or above, we don't understand how bad the situation is. A 5th grade child, right? A child who's in 5th class has spent almost 5-6 years in education. You give them a class 2 text, and more than half of them can't read it. right? You give them something as simple as 27 plus 14, and more than half of them can't do it. And so no country has jumped from middle income to high income without improving its education, its health, and its jobs, right? It's a fair, like we have the history of the world very clearly in front of us. So our bid is to help that education benefit. So, we had an independent evaluation a year ago where if we enter a school, then in just 1 year, 4 times more children are now achieving mastery than they were in the year previous to us. And we've been lucky to be able to now do it with thousands of teachers, thousands of schools, and thousands of children. And the aim is to just do this more and more as much as we can reach on as many children and as many teachers. And when we work in the early grades, where we try and build the foundation, because till class 3, a child is learning how to read. After class 3, a child needs to be able to read to learn. And vast majority of our children never pick up reading. So after that, in class 4, class 5, they're just expected to be able to read and learn, but the kid has not picked up reading. So they have no clue what is going on in the classroom. And so the drop, you hear a lot about children are on the streets. We actually have a 97.5% enrollment ratio, which means vast majority of our children start school. But then we have large dropouts, and there are many, many reasons for it. But a big reason is children are just bored. So they're bored, they're not learning, they go to school, they feel like idiots, they feel like failures. They're like, why will I spend time here? And they drop off. And then sort of they go into child labor and all of those things there, right? So if you're able to make those early years fun, engaging, make the children learn a lot, feel successful, you're able to then give them a significantly stronger foundation on which all the rest of the learning can happen. So that's what we do.
Wow. I love the part where you said like from year 1 to year 3, you learn how to read. And then the next onwards is to read to learn. And I think that's something that probably is not just like, I think it still exists and it still prevails in a lot of societies, even with like the master education or things that we do. Sometimes we miss out on that part. We kind of delve into hows and what's instead of actually going further into how are we going to deep dive into the learning aspect. So
yeah.
That brings a lot of clarity. But like you mentioned that your team helps students which are from a little different background than probably a lot of other schools. What are some of the significant challenges that you see, and how have like if you had to give some example to us, like how have you all been able to change that to like how you mentioned you improved it by 4x in terms of every mastery that the student had? How were you all able to do that?
Sure. So, so all the children, teachers, schools we work with which are in the poverty segment, right? So the really low income schools, low income children who come from very difficult, challenging backgrounds. And there are myriad problems, right? Like there's a really good book actually on this, a couple of them. I know you have your book questions later, but let's jump into this, right? There's one called Poor Economics, which some of you might have read. It's basically, which goes into, the point of the book was that people look at poor people and think of them as lazy, stupid, they make bad choices. That's why they're there. And what that book, through a lot of data and evidence, shows is that a vast majority of people, they're stuck in what are called these cycles of poverty. And so they're not able to break out of them. And that if any of us went into those cycles, we would start making the same choices that those people were making, and we would be stuck in the same cycle. So it's a lot more systemic than we sort of blame, the individual for that. Actually, another book is called Scarcity. And it talks about how when you have very little, it's hard for us to imagine the impact it has on every single thing, right? And I'll tell you a very visceral example of it. Many years ago, when we first started, we were running our own school, right? So we started with kindergarten, we had class 1, class 2. And so one day, one of our supporters, one of our funders, came with his young children to volunteer, right? And he brought his 2 daughters. And his younger daughter was about this much taller than the tallest kid in our class. And his older daughter was about this much taller, right? The funny thing was all our kids were 1 to 3 years older than his daughters. And his daughters were this taller, right? And the point is, if you go deeper than that, right? If you go into brain scans, you look at the at the brain scan of a 5-year-old child who's grown up in poverty and a 5-year-old child who's grown up in a good privileged background, you will almost see half the number of development. Right. And so the issue is that children are facing so many challenges, right? It could be health, it could be nutrition, it could be a stressful environment. And in almost every way, their growth is being hampered, they're being put in many challenges. Now, we can't tackle all of them. What we try and do is that once children come into the school, how can you help the teacher in the school create a super safe and welcoming environment? Right? Because if it's something which the child feels safe and excited about, there's a very high chance that the child will be able to learn much better. Right? I'll give you the most random stat ever. The single biggest predictor of whether a child will become a good reader in class 5, right? A really good predictor is if they felt loved and if someone read to them as a small child. So if you see a small child, the best thing you can do is sit them on your lap and read them a story. Now, the reason why it's a good predictor is because for children who've had this in their life, that means many other things are true, right? That means they have good, nutritious food. There are people caring about them. They're generally not in a stressful environment. So a lot of these things can be simply measured by, do they feel loved and cared for? And did they have someone read to them, right? Which means their mother was educated and so many things go from there. And so what we try and do is help the school as much as they can to create a good environment for that, right? It's welcoming, it's safe, it's fun. So we would do teacher training where we will sort of help them see what a fun environment is, right? And most teachers have never seen it themselves. So the first thing we do when we go and do a training is, right, like teachers will often be sitting at the back rows, hands folded, angry. And you ask them, why are you so angry? They're like, because we don't want to be here. We've been spent here. We've attended many trainings. They're boring. They're disrespectful. And we're like, well, we are not going to disrespect you, but this will not be boring. That's what we can promise. And we just give them a blast over 2 days. Now, at the end of 2 days, they come out and they're like, oh my God, I cannot believe that this is what teaching can be like. And then the reaction is, teach us how to do this in our classrooms. And so that's what we do, right? So the first thing we do is we just blow their minds with what an amazing learning environment can be, right? So once they experience it, all teachers are like, I want to make this happen. Right? The issue is they've never seen that to a large extent. And so then, we'll help teachers with lots of technique, ways to make that really fun. And then what we do is we really completely overhaul the curriculum in the school. I'd go into any, when I started teaching, right? I think I was teaching class 1 or class 2. And I was given a textbook early before I started 3 to 1, right? We were given a textbook, class 2 textbook, which had this story called Mr. Cross. And so about this guy called Mr. Cross, who's very angry and he's going on and swatting a fly. Right now, think about this. This is class 1. Most of these children have never been to school. Nobody they know speaks the language English. Right? The first words they're being exposed to is cross, swat. Right? Most of us would feel very unfamiliar with that story. And this is the first thing they're hearing on day 1. What are they? They're lost. What do they learn at the end of day 1 of school? A school is basically you sit, you don't understand anything, you go home. And that's what repeats for their entire schooling. So what we try and do is we try and change that. We're like, no, school is where you have a lot of fun, where you learn a lot. Right now, we'll change the curriculum. We'll make the stories more contextual, where what they'll see in the picture is not Mr. Cross, but an Abdul or a Ram or a Mansi, someone that they can relate to. And we build all the, there's a lot of evidence in how to do good teaching, which we'll sort of just weave in without boring any of the entities there. And then we will work on the assessments, on the change the stupid exam culture. So a lot of the, it's not one thing, but it's a lot of these things. The end result of that is that children are having fun. They're excited about school. Teachers are having a lot of fun, right? We've had, teachers who spend 18, 20 years teaching and they're like, I used to dread waking up in the morning. Now I'm up 30 minutes before my alarm because I'm so excited to go in the classroom. And once that cycle starts, it just sort of feeds in itself, and then you can't really fight all the effects of poverty, but you can really start giving children a solid leg up. You can help start building the foundation. And once that cycle starts, right, where everybody now starts believing, okay, children in this school learn, children in this teacher's class learn, parents start believing, and you start hearing all kinds of stories, right? The early stories that come is where parents will be like, I was at the grocery shop and there were stuff written in English and the child read it. The net thing is, when, and this is something we've learned over the years, and most of the evidence that you're seeing also is that for these kind of problems like education, health, poverty, there's never one thing that you can do, right? And so, for example, we early on started working with teachers. We realized you have to work with teachers on how to teach, you have to work with teachers on what to teach, which is curriculum. Then you have to go to assessments, then you have to work with the principal, with parents, and there are so many aspects of it. So the thing that makes it really challenging is that you're working on so many different dimensions to bring about a change. The thing that makes it exciting is that if you're able to sort of wrap your head around all of that, then you can actually start seeing tangible change, right? So, like I'll give you an example, right? So when we start working in a school, our team will go and as we'll do what's called the baseline. Basically, we'll actually go and assess the children in the school to get a sense of, okay, without us, what is a second year grade child being able to do at the end of the year, right? So we'll take an assessment of different children, try and see what they can read, what they can understand. And then for 1 year, our program will run in the school, right? And we'll have independent evaluators do it, but we'll also then at the end of the year, go and do the evaluation. I can't tell you the messages we get on Slack on that day, right? Because people are like, I assessed this child a year ago, right? The child was struggling massively. Now, I've assessed this child 1 year later and I can see the jump, right? And that person has been working with that school, right? So the tangibility of your impact, right? The question of here, what am I doing in my life? Does anything matter? Once you've made that shift and seen that shift, right? Now you can still have many questions about you, where am I going in life? But oh, wow, I did something in my life, or at least I did something in this year where something improved and changed. And so that's something that education takes a lot to be able to bring that change. Like it takes from you, anyone who's working, any teacher, any sort of organization, it's very hard. But if you're able to get that, there's almost nothing which is as satisfactory as seeing that spark in a child's eyes and you knowing that you in some way contributed to that.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. Like the only tangible way for me to see if I made any progress was to see my report card. And that also wasn't like very encouraging, right? And also I wanted to talk about like the relatability in our curriculum, right? Like I remember whenever I had to draw a house, like a scenery, like a landscape. It was always a house with a triangle and a square and a river and mountains, right? I had never seen that house ever in my life. Like I grew up in Mumbai, all I've seen are buildings, right? So it was so disconnected from what I was actually experiencing versus what I was expected to do, right?
Exactly. No, I completely hear that. And that makes such a huge, it seemed like a small thing. But when curriculum and content is relevant for children, meaningful, relatable, fun, everything jumps up, right? It's very hard for any teacher to bring to life a really boring curriculum. Right now, really great ones will be able to do, right? But we actually make life of all teachers incredibly hard by getting them to teach a lot of what is just not relevant and useful for our children, right? And you change that. You don't need an Amir Khan to make that change in everything, right? And you won't have that many Amir Khans from Tare Zameen Par, right? But there are enough good, motivated teachers who, if you gave them a powerful, well-researched, meaningful curriculum, can make a big, big difference. But it's not where it is, and that's what we're trying to sort of impact.
Sure. So Gaurav, I'm going to kind of circle back to your first conversation here, where you moved right from Accenture to Teach for India. probably with the For India sign out there. So I believe there was a passion to kind of make a change right then. And that kind of led you in that direction. But what were your learnings from Teach for India, which inspired you to kind of build 3 to 1? Because I believe Teach for India also works in a similar space where they help underprivileged students in providing education facilities and tutors. So, how did you kind of diversify from there to 3 to 1, and what was your key takeaways from that role?
Yeah. So many, I'll keep it sort of one to sort of relevant to what we've been talking about, right? I think the one big thing was just seeing it's very hard, but if you can actually get through to a child and help them see their potential and maximize that, it is one of the best feelings you can have. It's one of the most tangible ways you can impact. Right? I'm still in touch with many of the students I taught 12, 13, 14 years ago now, almost. And so it was just a very powerful feeling. And I wanted to be able to try and do that with more children, many more schools, many more teachers. So I think that was one. The second was, a much deeper understanding of the education system and what parts of it break down and where exactly do I want to intervene, right? So I understood the system a lot better. Then, after the fellowship, then when I'd gone into it, I had a little bit more nuanced understanding of where do I want to work and how do I want to work into. And third was just, Teach for India was the first time, I think, for many of us. So I was in the first batch, the first cohort. So for many of us, it was the first time where, at least for me, it was the first time where, I still, it's been so long, but I still remember that day one so clearly, is where we're all in this big room and everyone is introducing. And I'm like, where were all of you for the rest of my life? Like, I thought I was the crazy one. Here, everybody's equally crazy. That understanding that, okay, I was like, everybody here wanted to make a change. It was very similar sort of, passion level, very similar excitement. And I think it doesn't have to be Teach for India, right? It can be any place where you feel a resonance with people. And where you feel that, they feel something very similar to what I feel. They think very similar, like there is an acceptance, there's an understanding. And that was just remarkable to experience, right? And then since then, I've just made sure that that's the theme of my life. So the work I do, the friends I have, they're all sort of fairly similarly minded. They're all trying to do something to improve the world in that way. They don't just accept the world as it is, but want to do something about it, big or small, whatever way, fairly thoughtful. And that's been amazing, right? Like, it's just like having that kind of people all around. It's just such a privilege. And to have known a life where I didn't have that, and to now have a life where I have it in all aspects, it's just like I feel like I've won a lottery. And so that's one of the big sort of takeaways of how important people are and how important those kind of people are, and to have them around you in as much as you can.
Absolutely. And I think how you rightly said, day one and the kind of excitement, the kind of enthusiasm that you bring to like probably this or any organization that you're joining. But I think you also mentioned that for you, when you were building 3 to 1, culture was one of the most important thing. So how did you kind of bring that day one feeling throughout their entire career or throughout their journey with you? How were you able to build that with the right culture? Like, what were some of your highlights out there to make that happen? Because it's a pretty rewarding feel, but at least from our conversation, I already feel a lot more emotional. So how do you balance that while you're doing the job?
Yeah. So, at 3 to 1, a big focus of mine was culture. And that's actually one of the most important things that a leader can control. It's actually among the only things a leader can, to any reasonable extent, control. Like if you go deep in leadership, you realize that you actually have a lot less control than people think. And leaders who are very controlling are not good leaders. Great people don't want to work for them. So let me give you a different view of culture, right? People think of, it's a very mixed term. People, when you ask a normal person what is culture, they're like, cool company hai, perks hai, nap milta hai, right? Like that's not what I mean by culture. Um, in and every organization, every institution has culture, right? Culture is basically, as I see it, the set of assumptions, beliefs, values which guide decision making and behavior. That's what culture is, right? So if you think in any place, right, let's say, and each place has a culture. So you go, let's say, if you go to in Bombay, right, you go to the train station versus the airport, right? You will see people behaving differently. You will often see the same person behaving differently, right? Because there's an assumption around how I need to make decisions here, right? How I need to act, how I need to behave, right? The same way any individual in different environments, right? So every place, every group, every institution has a culture. You might have it explicit or you might have it implicit, right? It might be stated or unstated, right? But the way people are behaving, the way decisions are done, you'll know. And the thing that used to most annoy me was when there was a huge difference between the stated culture and the lived culture, right? Like you'll know it very simply where if in an organization people say certain things about this is our value, this is our how we operate, but in the day to day that never plays out. So right. So now there are two problems. That one is everyone knows that that's not the culture, that the culture is something else, right? Either we say fairness and this, and here it's whoever the boss likes, all of that. But there's a much more deeper, dangerous things that come out, right? When people are in a culture where they see that what is said versus what is lived are two different things, they immediately sort of, subconsciously start questioning the integrity of that place. They start questioning the integrity of the people involved. They start learning that, okay, you have to say something and do something. Right now, if any of you worked in big corporates and you wonder why is that culture like that, why is it that everyone hates it to such a large extent? Why do people say, yeah, everyone says this and does this? Because everybody's internalized that, we actually say something else where we do something else. And once that feeling comes into an org, it's like cancer. It just eats everything up because what you start, and then it feeds into everything. It can feed into product. That we say these things, that we are user focused, but the user doesn't show up in our work in any way, right? We say that we are customer centric, but there's no real, what people learn is, okay, there's a language you use and there's a completely different thing that you do. And so for me, it was very important that we built a culture that we thought a lot about, and then we made sure that the street and the lived culture were the same, right? So we used to do a lot of things around that. I spent a lot of time focusing on that, but that I wanted to just share sort of what I mean when I say culture and why we focus so much on it. And just one last point, right? If you have a good culture, it's essentially the only way for a leader to scale. Okay. In most organizations, especially right now, if you'll see, right? If you look at your jobs, you're basically constantly making decisions, right? Let's say which feature, which thing, right? That's what you're doing, right? Now, if you have a big organization, right? Or any number, right? 10 people, 50 people, 100 people, assuming the leader wants decision-making to happen a certain way. There are two ways to do it, right? You come and make every decision, right? That leader will be a micromanager, will drive everyone crazy, and people run away from that kind of leader. Or the other way is you set a culture where everyone deeply imbibes the principles of action, decision-making, thought that this org embodies. Once that happens, when everyone starts sort of resonating, we all feel those things, we think similarly, like if you're a user facing, so we always think of the user, whatever your values are, if they become DNA of everyone, the leader doesn't need to be there to make every decision. Because the people will automatically make the right decision for the organization, for the mission, for the purpose. And so the leader's job is actually not to go and make every decision, but to empower everyone and align everyone on how decisions are made in this organization, how actions are done in this organization. And if you do that, basically you've scaled yourself. And so the other reason of focusing on culture is actually the only way you can scale as a leader, where you don't have to be physically present. And once you reach any scale, you can't be physically present. Right? So how do you ensure that the right values are still maintained, the right ethos are still maintained? It's by working on the culture, the process, and the people. So those are some of my thoughts on that.
Yeah. And the part where you talked about big organizations, right? I completely agree with that. It's kind of internalized that if they're saying X, then you don't have to do X. It's generally A in that case. But I wanted to ask, like the culture part, it resonated with me. But I wanted to ask, how do you like if I'm a leader, how do I enforce it within the organization? Not enforce. Enforce is the wrong word, but how do you integrate it within the organization? You know?
Sure. So here's what I would do that's worked pretty well for me. It's something you would do as in a class as a teacher. Here's something I did, as a leader of an organization. It's fairly simple, right? If I say, you're like, that makes sense. The trick is not in what I'm going to say. The trick is in doing it every day. Okay. But here's the simplest steps I have found. Step one, you spend a lot of time thinking on what you want the culture to be. Now you can think on your own by going inside, like what you were saying, Adit. You have to go figure out inside who you are, get that clarity. You can go it by, reading up or listening to other organizations, learning from them what resonates. You can speak with the people around you. You can look at the work you're trying to do. So what's the right culture? We spend a reasonable amount of time thinking, having clarity on who we will be and who will we not be. And I'm not talking about like, okay, we will not lie, right? Ye nahi, right? What you're doing is you're picking from good options and rejecting many of them. That's when you're actually coming to something. If you say, okay, we will be full of integrity, we will have customer focus, ये generic ज्ञान से कुछ नहीं होने वाला किसी को, right? There has to be something really meaningful, specific, resonate, and it means something to your org. And that what I found is a really good thing is where it would not be applicable to another good org. That means, okay, this is fit for you. This is not some generic nonsense that you've just picked from what are good values to have, right? And you've not picked it from moral science textbook. So first step is that, right? Like think, decide what is that. Second is find a really powerful, simple way to articulate it, right? You have to be able to communicate in a way that is simple, powerful, catchy, that people resonate with it. It goes into their hearts, it goes into their heads. So that's really key, articulation. Third is that you basically are constantly modeling it. And this is now, first two you can do, all the breakdowns happen in step 3 and step 4, which is you have to be the number one example of that culture, right? So when we would bring people into our organization, right, we would hire people, then we would have this few weeks of induction or training or all of that, right? Early on, people will be a little skeptical. We'll tell them what some of our values, our culture are. Like, okay, fine, sab bolte all of that, right? By the end of the first week, people were like, you all actually live this, right? And you should ask us, right? The people tell them, and they're very confused. They're like, wait, so you actually mean what you're saying, right? Like what you were saying, Tapan, right? So people are so experienced that, hey, people say something, do something, then they're like, wait, so you actually live these things that you say. Now that is incredibly powerful, right? Because once people see that, like that's what they want to do. They're like, yeah, I don't want to live a life where I'm saying something, doing something else. It's so much simpler and easier to have the resonance. You need to see that that's the thing, right? So the third thing, which is super key, is whoever is there in the org, right? The leadership or every existing employee, when new people come in, is you have to model, live that culture. Because if you don't, then lived culture trumps stated culture, right? It's not what you're saying, it's what you are doing. Nobody will pay attention, right? And it comes actually from education. There's a really funny quote, which is, children have never been good at listening to adults, but they have never failed to imitate them, right? And it applies to everything. We don't listen to what people say, we do what they do, right? In whatever environment. So the third step is modeling. Fourth step is very simple, which is you call out positively. So whenever you see someone living into that culture, you positively reinforce that. You praise it publicly, you praise it privately, you praise it with lots of enthusiasm, you praise it with, in ways that work for the person. And you do that a lot more than you do the criticism of when they're not following it, right? Like criticism is a lot less effective. The praise is a lot more effective. And that's pretty much it. That's what I figured, right? Get clarity, articulate it, model it, and then praise it. Like I said, it's very simple to say, doing it day in, day out, when the hard decisions come, when you're tired, when you don't want to do it, when you have 15 different things pulling you, that's the hard part. And that's what we would spend a lot of time trying to do as best as we can. And again, Harsh was a great model of that. And he's one of the best people to observe doing these things.
No, absolutely. I think, like you rightly said, the most difficult part is to do it regularly. That's the key. I think every company or every leader when they start out, they build on some certain set of values, but going down the timeline, probably they either evaporate or they transition, and that communication is not put out in the right way. And I think just like trying to make sure you're the same decision maker every day is a challenge as humans in general. So I think this is a very, very good learning lesson for anybody. Probably leadership 101. This could be one of the good points out there.
Great.
I wanted to ask on similar line, are there any other frameworks that you make, that you use while making decisions like this? I was reading through the culture, or that's on the website, right? 3-1, excellence is a habit. And
we have many frameworks here.
Okay.
We love our frameworks. So to tell me something more specific, and if I have something, I'll share on that.
Just in general. So if you are like under pressure, or like if there is a problem, like how do you solve that, right? Like how do you make a decision around that? So in like something on those
So let's go with problem solving, right? Like fairly, I'll give you some things that have helped me a lot, that help people a lot. A lot of it is fairly sort of obvious, right? Like the single biggest thing with problem solving is don't solve the problem till you understand it. The hardest thing for people to do. We love solving problems. We love giving advice. We hate understanding. Kitna boring hai. You bring me some problem. Right? If you go to any friend, uncle, auntie, right, anything, even before you finish speaking, they'll tell you the solution. The issue is that almost all the nuance of problem solving comes actually from the problem part and not from the solving part. So it is far more useful spend of your time to spend an unimaginable amount of time understanding the problem, right? What people do is they'll jump into solving it, right? Having not understood who the user is, what the issue is, right? Like what actually has to be done. So let me sort of, I know, Hironi, you mentioned sort of marketing and some things you do. So really useful framework I find is this very simple concept of jobs to be done, right? It comes from Clayton Christensen. Some of you might be familiar with it, but it's a very simple framework to understand that, like when a user, whenever you're hiring a product, whenever you use a product, they're not trying to use something. There's a job that they need to get done, right? And one of the best quotes I have for that is it's an old Theodore Roosevelt quote, which goes, "The customer doesn't want a 6-inch drill; they want a 6-inch hole." Right? And it's such a simple thing. Right? They don't care about your drill and how many rotators it has and how fancy it is. They have a problem. Unko frame lagana hai. There's no hole. They need something that will get that hole. Now, if you don't understand that simple thing, that what is the situation in which this need arose? Why does the customer want a drill, right? You will try and tell them ki it has so many rotators and it goes like this. And they don't get, what they care is it doesn't make a mess. It's easy to operate. It has a long wire that can go anywhere in the house. But it's these kind of things. So the thing is, the more nuanced your understanding of the problem, the better chance you have for it, right? So the first thing we try and stress a lot is don't solve, understand, right? Spend as much time till you have as good an articulation of the problem as the user, right? So what we'll do, for example, is we'll go to a user for anything, right? Either crisis or something, and we'll ask them what the issue, right? They'll tell us something. We'll try and put it down and then go back to them and say, this is what we heard you say. Is this what you said? And half the time you will not believe, right? And when we do this, people are like, oh, of course I hear very well, right? Then you get them to do this exercise and they'll go back to the user and the user, I didn't say this. And they're like, oh, maybe I'm not that good a listener that I thought I was, right? Or maybe they said something else, or maybe the user now has more clarity based on that, right? So we one of the things we teach people is to spend a lot of time understanding the actual issue, the user, the problem, the situation. And so once you've done that, is then you sort of get into the sort of the, okay, now let's come up with solutions there, right? There, my don't ask the user. Right? Do not ask the user what the solution should be, right? Like, because the other problem is when we tell people to go and speak with the user, they're like, okay, what do you want? Right? Now, that is really bad advice, right? The problem is when you ask users for the solution, they will always tell you what they know from the past. Right? Because unko wahi malum hai, so they'll tell you, okay, right? That's what that famous saying, right? Like Henry Ford had that saying that if I asked my users what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse. Right? Now, people often use this line to say, as an example, you should not speak with the users. I think that's a wrong lesson. I think this is a very nuanced call. What it tells us is the user had a very good understanding of the problem, which is, I want to go faster, I'm not going faster. Right? They had a very clear understanding of what the solution should be able to do. Make me go faster. And as always, they told you a solution which was based on the past. Right? So now your job as the creator, problem solver, designer is to understand, what's the problem? Speed. What is the measure of success? Make the person go faster. And then you bring your creativity to design a solution, which might be something very different, right? So Henry Ford goes back and says, well, I don't have a horse, but I have this thing which is, a car and it goes fast. And they're like, sure, I don't really care about the horse. I just thought I wanted a horse, but this thing goes faster. I'll go with it. And so that's the piece around that, right? You understand the problem from the user, you understand the measure of success from the user, but then you bring your creativity, your innovation, your excellence to solve that problem there, right? So these are some of the ways sort of we try and do problem solving. We try and use that. I don't know if they sort of answered your question, Tapan, and helped sort of give some insights into that.
No, definitely did. 100%. Yeah, I think I was looking for a quote from Naval Ravikant, which talked about something similar. You quoted Henry Ford, but there was a quote from him where he talked about users not knowing what they wanted. So don't go for solutions for them, ask the right questions. There was a quote, I forgot exactly what it was.
Yeah.
But yeah. Definitely answers it.
Yeah. People just, my only concern is people go overboard. Either they expect the user to give the solution, or they're like, user doesn't know anything. And I'm like, no, they know about the problem. They know about the pain point. And don't ask them about the solution, because then they'll just tell you the same thing as the past, which I'm sure you must be seeing in your work also.
Yeah, I think that's pretty true. Like at least from me, when it comes to clients and sitting down with them and I'm like trying to map down their marketing journey or what their next set of goals are, it's all most of the time coming from the past on what they've experienced, what they don't want to do, where they want to move forward, but not knowing probably what's the right method right now. They will still bring the same old methods, but probably the world has changed. The digital space has changed and you want to put out something new. So then, it's the part of convincing them to take that leap of faith, experiment with you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like my client meetings usually start with them sending me a link to Twitter or like LinkedIn कि ऐसा किया है competitor ने, हम लोग को भी ऐसा चाहिए. Can you do it? It's like, wait, what do you want to do? You want to promote your sponsor? You want to increase engagement? Let's start with that. Yeah, it's a very and it's difficult. It's so easier to just do what they ask rather than asking the questions.
Yeah. I will say this, right? What I found is that you build, if you can somehow pursue through that, you build trust, loyalty, and you give them a sense of your competence much faster, better, if you can articulate their problems back to them in a much more coherent, clear manner. Right? It's very hard to do that with someone, but if you can get to a place with anyone, right, where you are able to repeat to them their problems in a clearer manner, suddenly they're like a few things. Whoa, this person understands me, right? And so the trust level goes up. And the second is, okay, this person is clearly, competent, smart. Okay, I can trust them. So I found that I can almost never convince them of my amazing solution to try, right? It's too blocked. But if I convince them that I care, I understand, and I can show that to them in a visceral, emotional, powerful way, I find that they're a lot more open to taking the leap. And I found I get much more traction on that by talking a lot about their problems and less if I try and talk about my solution.
Yep, I think that's like how I go about my pitches most of the time. That's how I
Great.
start my pitch. So I wouldn't agree more. But yeah, coming to the leadership space, right? You have been leading a team. I'm not too sure about how many, but obviously, like with teaching with so many people, it's been a lot of people that you engage with on a regular basis. This is something that I have felt as a little bit of disconnect from what I thought I would do as a leader. Right? You would probably come up with bigger strategies and make some changes. This is me 5 years back dreaming into the leadership world. And when it actually comes down to execution, you are still figuring out, uh, convincing your clients to be with you, getting the money, making sure your account payment is in place, like making sure your team is kind of working on your clients. But it is not exactly the execution that you think about, but the execution that has to be done to make things happen or to let things keep going. So how was your transition there? Probably right out of fellowship, you would have thought of something different, but what actually like leadership throws to you or like managing a team throws to you is very different. Like how did you go about that transition and make it right?
Yeah. So 100% agree with you on sort of that's how it plays out. I'll share more. The good thing was I actually didn't have any big idea of, that I should be setting the big thing, all of that. I had actually spent a lot of time thinking about leadership, reading about it, but I never actually led a team. I had essentially said no to every opportunity in school, college. And that's what people say, take those opportunities. I actually said no to every single opportunity because I was like, yeah, this is not the right opportunity. Nobody's going to give you the freedom to actually do it how I want to do it. Right? So I'm not going to take this. Right? So that's why I said the whole org because I'm like, yeah, SNE yoga. So, but I was, and maybe because through the teaching exposure, right? Let me tell you something. Years back, I heard this Elon Musk interview where somebody was talking to him about, SpaceX. And this is before he's become famous. Right now, Elon Musk is like Elon Musk in every way. You either love him or hate him. We're bigger than God itself. But this is way back, right? 10, 12 years ago when Tesla is just about surviving. It looks like maybe SpaceX might succeed, right? We're still not sure. So somebody asked him, Yaraki, how much time do you get to do with big picture thinking, all of that? Right now, you're speaking to someone who's doing space. Right? You're like, the big picture thinking, karta, strategy, all of this. He basically just recounts his week, right? Which is essentially about in this factory, this fire happened, so I had to do this. Then we had this production stuck here. Then I had to go in Tesla because this motor broke down. And then we had this accounting issue. And it's essentially as far from big picture visioning strategy, all of that as you can imagine, right? And you go through the list of any CEO, anyone, and that's what you will find, right? Because, even if you look at what I told you about culture, right? Only the first step was thinking. Right? But I told you that's not where the breakdown happens. Breakdown happens in modeling, praising, in all of those things, right? So for anyone who's interested in any kind of leadership management, my first thing will be the strategy, envisioning, all of that will be a significantly smaller part than what you're thinking. And that is not a bad thing, right? That is like, it's a feature, not a bug, right? To speak in the language of coders, right? So you have to understand that is an important but a smaller part of it, and bringing that strategy to life, the people, the process is the real work, right? Point number one to that, right? And so if you don't have that illusion, you will not sort of suffer, right? I'll tell you the number one book on this is Andy Grove's book. I don't know if you've read it, right? High Output Management, right? If you put a gun to my head and say, tell me one management book, I'll say High Output Management. There's almost nothing written as well. He basically, to a large extent, you can give him a huge amount of credit for building Intel, right? And Intel now doesn't have the same cachet in the last 10, 15 years as it had, 20, 30, 40 years ago. Intel was basically the Apple plus almost AWS of computer world that time, right? Imagine in some entity mixture of that, right? That's what Intel was. And he built that. If you read that book, one is it'll teach you almost everything you need to know about management. But you will see the person who changed the trajectory of semiconductors, who saved Intel from so many disasters, and who built into this massive company. All he's talking about is how he does meetings, how he does evaluation, how he gives feedback, how they set goals, how he does check-in, what he does when he's eating food, and how he's interacting with them. And you see the real inside and guts of what leadership and management is, and that'll give you a much more accurate understanding. And I think you will realize that, so if that's what you're doing, you're not failing, right? That's what the part of that. That's my one main point. The second thing I will say is, if you want to change some of the things you're doing, again, your answer is culture, people, process. If you have the right people, if you have the right culture, if you have the right process, you don't need to be involved in everything. Then, the system can take care, the people can take care. Right? And that's for example, right? I had incredible people like Harsh and all our team, which meant that I was not necessarily doing the same thing every year, right? I could do different things. Basically, as a leader, your job is to handle the shittiest problem in the organization, the problem that nobody else can solve, right? Like basically what has been passed up the chain as this is the worst problem in the organization that no one wants to deal with or nobody can deal with. Here, leader, your privilege is to eat this problem every day. Right? That's what you get. You get the worst problem served to you on a dish every single day, and your job is to deal with them. The only thing I learned about this was if you set a good team, good culture, at least those problems will keep changing. So you're dealing with bad problems every day. It's just different problems. So that's what growth looks like. It's not like I sub settle ho gaya. Now, I just sit on front of my whiteboard and I think. Right? It was not for me. It's not for any of the leaders I have seen. What you do have a choice. If you get the right people, if you set the right process, if you set the right culture, you will be able to worry about different problems than what you were worrying 2-3 years ago or a year ago. So that's what at least growth looks like as I understand. Does that sort of answer your question, Hiloni?
Yeah, that's very well put, and probably like all my feelings kind of out there. Like this is exactly what I feel on a day-to-day basis. And at times, you just don't feel like it's growth because you're just solving probably sometimes like very micro problems, and you're like, are you sure this is what my job role was supposed to do? Like you keep questioning it, but then you're like, who else is gonna do it if not me? And then you take that up.
Cool. We can move to the next section. Top 3 should be
books. I've told you now, all of them.
Yeah. Okay. We can talk about maybe like the podcast, movies relating to like maybe culture building or leadership.
Or else even in books, if you have books or recommendation in like psychology or behavioral science, something like that, that would be helpful as well.
Yeah, behavioral psychology, I would say, although it's having a little bit of a rough moment over the last few years, but, a lot of Daniel Kahneman's work, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, a lot of, that's for the more older work, and a lot more of the Adam Grant work in the last few years. I found those to be really good sort of sources there. For leadership, another book we highly recommend is, which Harsh might have mentioned, I don't know, is First Break All the Rules. For an early manager, I found that to be among the in some ways, high output management is really sort of it gives you all the details. But First Break All the Rules helps you set some of the mindsets to really understand. And often a lot of us pick up bad habits or bad mindsets of what leadership is, and it really helps sort of break some of those. So I've found that to be, very, very good on that front.
Okay. Moving on to probably our next question would be, if you are like an avid podcast listener or you follow some YouTube channels, which would be your top 3 favorite right now, probably in 2021?
Yes, I actually I've not managed to listen to a lot of podcasts recently. I see a lot earlier. I've been doing actually audiobooks a little bit, and I've been trying to go back to fiction a little bit in every way, because otherwise I'm always reading or consuming something serious all the time. Like if I'm not doing something, I am just reading. And after a point, it got too much for me. So I'm trying to build a little bit more fiction into my life, both reading and listening. So I've been doing a little bit of sci-fi, all of that. But podcasts, I used to listen a lot actually earlier on, which are not so education based. They were a little bit different. Was this? It doesn't run anymore. Actually, called Exponent, which is a little bit about strategy and those kind of things. So it's not run for the last couple of years, but I would sort of listen to those a lot, and some similar ones like that. And now maybe What the Hat.
Thank you for that shameless plug. Do you so like any investments, top 3 investments that you've made, monetary or non-monetary? Maybe it might be investing in hiring someone, or maybe investing in some habit.
I thought you were going on the Bitcoin route, right?
That's also valid if you have the next Bitcoin.
Here I find on a random note, I find the whole concept of Bitcoin fascinating. I don't invest. I just watch and read, right from the original paper so many years ago. I think it's a very cool concept, which is completely crazy right now. So I like to be an observer. In terms of investments, I'll say one, which I think many people were not happy with. I spent basically almost all of my teenage years. I gave up on studies to the disappointment of my mother. And I spent all the time either just going in or reading about the world, about philosophy, about understanding myself, about what life meant, what was the purpose of life. And that's why they were fairly difficult years, because if you don't have the right mentor in that age, you can really drive yourself in very dark places, which I did. And didn't have the right guidance. So just got stuck in all kinds of, mental loops in all kinds of places. But the reason I did it then, and I feel glad about making that investment then, is most people, or at least a large number, do it at some point in life. You can either, your options are you do it in your early years, or you do it in your 30s, or you do it in your 50s, or you do it in your 70s. My only point is the later you do it, the less you can do something with it. And the earlier you do it, the more, like what you were saying, right? You have clarity on who you are not, what you want, what you don't want, which then helps you make decisions and choices a lot easier. And that was almost a decade, right? Almost from the age of 12, 13 to the age of 23, 24. It was a really personally very, very difficult time, and in various ways. But from everything that's happened since then, that was a remarkable investment to be able to go down that road, just spend a lot of time either inside or trying to understand sort of the world as much as I could. So personally, I think that was a great investment. And I think the other would be, of course, the team that we built at 3-1, which was just incredible. Like people like Harsh that, but just all around. And like I said this at the start, I wish most young people, but everyone can be part of a really great team and experience what that feels like. It is one of the most magical feelings you will have, because you will feel like you are so much better, and you will be so much better. You will have so much fun. And it makes such a huge difference to your learning, your growth, your trajectory. And investing in those people and investing in those relationships has paid more than any dividend I could have hoped for.
Awesome. Gaurav, it was a delightful conversation, a lot to learn, and very genuine, honest answers from your end. Thank you so much for being with us on the show. It was a pleasure, and looking forward to keep in touch and keep knowing about your journey forward.
Okay. You asked really good questions. I enjoyed the chat. Do share sort of whatever comes out from this. And I wish all of you best of luck with this. And then with whatever else you might do. And my sense is that I think lots of people would be resonating with what you're creating. I would have found this very valuable, when I was in my lost phase, and I'm guessing that's who you're creating for. So I would be very surprised, if in fact, I would not be surprised if there are lots of people who are finding a lot of value from this. So good job in creating this.